Hi, my name is Tim Brost and I'm an AVEVA product specialist. And in today's video, we're going to be doing a live demo with AVEVA's communication drivers and specifically talking and showing about MQTT with the Sparkplug B specification. So previously, AVEVA's communication driver in terms of the Sparkplug B specification was only able to act as a subscriber to an MQTT broker. In version 2023 release, we've added the capability for that same driver to act as an MQTT publisher with the Sparkplug B specification. Now, in terms of architectures from a high-level point of view, on the edge side, that can be an entire plant, it can be a machine, a station, or even an IoT embedded sensor. Using that communication driver to publish to an MQTT broker, and then using another computer and another instance of that communication driver to act as a subscriber to that broker, and then visualize and consume that information in System Platform or maybe some other tool that AVEVA has to offer. Now commercially, it's sold as a bundle as a part of InTouch and System Platform, or as a standalone driver suite that you can separate from the two. So depending on your needs and your architecture, there's some flexibility there. There's also capability for multi-instances of the communication driver. So if you need to have multiple instances of the MQTT driver, maybe to handle throughput and load, as an example, you can instantiate that driver to better manage that data. In terms of capabilities, right, every value is sent with a VTQ, or value, time, and quality. In terms of the payload that's sent, right, as I've mentioned, right, we're kind of talking about this complex nested structure, which is kind of what defines the MQTT Sparkplug B specification. And then there's also capabilities for store and forward, right? If the publisher loses connection to that broker, right, it'll store that data locally until that network connection's restored. Now, in terms of our demo architecture, I've simplified it for demo purposes, but we have two nodes, right? One node that's acting as our MQTT publisher node, and the other node that's acting as our MQTT subscriber node. Now, on the publisher node, I've kind of consolidated some of the components, and I've got my PLC simulator that's generating values, and then I'm talking to a Modbus TCP driver, which ultimately will talk to our Galaxy through our DI object, and the data will then be passed on to our application object. Then we'll configure a publisher for the MQTT driver to that application object to send that data to our Mosquito MQTT broker, which is a free on-premise broker from the Eclipse Foundation. And then in our subscriber node, we'll then configure the MQTT driver to act as a subscriber and have our second independent Galaxy consume that information, and we'll be able to view that data on a separate application object. So let's take a look. So here we have my environment. I have two computers, one that's called Supervisory and one that's called Enterprise. So Supervisory is going to be our publishing node. And there's been some pre-work and some setup for this demo. And so just to kind of walk through that a bit, we've got our simulator running and generating values. From a driver's perspective, on this computer, we've got the Modbus TCP driver, as well as the MQTT driver, which we'll configure later on in this demo. And we've got the Mosquito broker that's installed. There's things like the config file where you can manage configuration of the broker itself. Things like, do you want anonymous access to be allowed? Which port do you want to define? Do you want password security to be enforced? Do you want TLS encryption in terms of node-to-node communication? So any and all of those things are configured within this config file for Mosquito. Now, in terms of actually connecting to that broker, we can simulate and visualize that with this MQTT Explorer client, and we'll kind of connect to this broker in just a minute. All right, so that being said, let's go into our IDE, and I just want to validate that my application objects, tank 1 and 2, are talking to my PLC simulator via Modbus. So I have a DI object, and if I open this up, I can see that it's configured to be, for the server node, be the same machine, and the server name is Modbus TCP, along with my topic associated. So I can close that out, and if I select this topic, I get this mapping pane, and I can just test my communication, and I can see that I've got instantaneous snapshot of positive or valid values. So that's great. So let's go ahead and configure our MQTT publisher driver. So in our driver, we're going to expand out, and on configuration, we're going to right click and say add MQTT publisher connection. And for the broker address, right, this can be a machine name or an IP address. So I know that it's local, and my machine name or machine IP address is 10.0.0.4. The port number that I'm choosing to use is 883. And we can validate the address and port, say that it was successful. And if we wanted to enable TLS encryption via either TLS 1.2 or 1.3, or enable password authentication in terms of being able to publish to that broker, we could. For now, we're just going to skip this for the simplicity of the demo. On the publisher side, we get this browser that can configure how we want to publish our data. So we get the name of the connection, and we could rename this. We'll leave this the same, and we'll give it a group of ID of just demo, and choose the message format to be sent via Sparkplug. Now there's some other settings in terms of retaining the last message that was sent. In terms of the quality of service, there's a few different parameters that are associated to MQTT. So at most once is no guarantee that the value is sent. At least once is at least one time it'll sent, but maybe more, depending on network connectivity. And then exactly once, that value will only be sent one time to that broker. And then if you want to enable store and forward, for example, you'll get options for wraparound data or stop collecting data, which will basically choose which end of the data set do you want to keep, right? Do you want to keep the latest values, or do you want to keep the oldest values? So what we can do is we can add a device, and we'll save our changes. And here we can just simply browse, right? This is tapping into our system platform Galaxy and our Galaxy model. And we can browse our model and find those tank assets. And on those tank assets, we have some attributes, and we can assign one or multiple attributes to that device. So we'll just do this tank 1 PV attribute here. And we can add a separate device. And again, browse to the second tank and find that second tank PV attribute. And we can save, and we can save the entire configuration for the publisher. So it's pretty simple. Now, if you wanted to, you can bulk create and edit these things via import and exporting tools. But for now, we're just going to leave it as is. So what we can do is we can right click and start our MQTT driver. And just to make sure that the Mosquito broker is running properly, I'm actually going to go to my command prompt and restart my broker. So I'm going to first stop it using this net stop mosquito command, and then say net start mosquito to start the broker. Okay, great. So in our client, I've set up a connection to that broker, again, to find the host IP address, as well as that port number. And we can see that we've got a new topic, and we can see that client ID that we defined as demo, and we can see some of the configuration that's being sent from device 1 and device 2, and these are just some quality parameters for that broker. So we can confirm that that data is being sent up into that broker. Now on the subscriber side, we can go over to this machine and open up our OCMC, or previously known as the System Management Console, and we can expand the drivers list and MQTT and configuration, and we can add a broker connection or a subscriber. So here we can validate again that broker's IP address is 10.0.0.4, and the port number again was 8883. Now the subscriber client ID needs to be unique for every subscriber to our broker, but we can leave that the same. We want to be able to subscribe to that Sparkplug infrastructure, and we can leave the rest in terms of SCADA host ID and listener client ID the same. We can validate the port and address as successful. And again, optionally, you can encrypt with TLS as well as connection user identities information. So on the browser side, and let's deactivate this and restart it. And get it running, and then go back to our MQTT browser. And what we can see is that it brings in that hierarchy from the broker into our client utility here in the driver. So I can see that demo client group, the edge gateway, and then our two devices. Right? Selecting them, I can see the Sparkplug B hierarchy, as well as attributes that have been configured for each tank. Right? Go to device 1 or device 2, right? You can see those attributes. And selecting these attributes, right, I can see the Sparkplug reference that's going to be used by our system platform Galaxy in this computer. So let's go ahead and configure a group connection, and we can leave this the same. So this syntax is just brought in from the name, whatever name you give that group connection here. And then the device items, right, we can start adding aliases for those item references. So I can just call this one tank 1, and then I can go to save the changes and go back to my browser and find device 0. Copy, C. And then in device items, paste, and we've got our reference now. Let's do the same thing for tank 2. So let's add one, tank 2, and go to our broker, connection, and select device 1, and get the tank 2 reference. All right, so we've got our references and our aliases. And now we can go into, and we'll save the changes. And now we can go into System Platform and configure a couple objects in order to visualize that data. So we can first define our DI object. So we'll double click this guy called MQTT. And we can leave the server name as the MQTT server, as well as the server node is going to be localhost. And then for the scan group, we can choose, the normal scan group, and we can add an attribute. So this attribute we can call tank1 underscore PV, and for the item reference we can browse that broker's connection and find our tank1 alias that we defined just a minute ago. And we can do the same thing by adding a new one, calling it tank2 PV, and browsing again that client group and finding tank 2. And we can save and close and check in. All right, so now we can go ahead and deploy this object. And we are successful. And then lastly, we just need to create an application object to view that data. So let's just go to derivation, and we'll minimize this, and let's create just an instance of a user-defined object. And we can leave that as default. Now let's open it up. And we can add an attribute, and let's close this to give us some more real estate. And we can call this just attribute 1. We can just say tank1 PV for the description, and we can make it a float, and we'll enable IO. And we can do the same thing, add a second attribute, and call it tank2 PV, again a float, and enable IO. So in each of them, we're going to browse the IO field and hit our MQTT device integration object and find our attribute. Click OK. And we can do the same thing for our second attribute. All right, so we've got our attributes properly referenced, and we can save and close and check in. And lastly, we can deploy, and we'll be able to view those attributes within Object Viewer System Platform. So we'll right click. Let's just click double check to make sure that's properly in the right area. Great, we can right click and click View in Object Viewer. And as it loads, we can scroll down, find our attributes. So we'll select attribute 1 and 2, bring them into the watch window, And as they initialize, we'll be able to see that we're going to get live data. Again, that data is coming from our broker, which is being published from a completely different system, a completely different galaxy, via that MQTT communication driver. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. Bye.